In this video I'll be ranking every single living thing in these two games that tries to kill you. This will include minor enemies like murderous kids and leeches, as well as the big bosses like the chefs and the doctor. So the title of this video says that I'm ranking these things from worst to best, but what does that actually mean? Well, it's a combination of multiple things. Considering these two are horror puzzle games, those two elements are usually the most important. So for each monster I'll take the scariness factor into consideration, as well as how well done the puzzles are, if there are any. But I'll also take into account other things like atmosphere, story, AI and the visuals. All those things matter to me in these two games. So the ranking is going to be extremely subjective. Don't expect to agree with every placement here. Anyway, let's begin at number 18. Number 18 is, obviously, the leeches. There's not a whole lot to say about them because they're wholly uninteresting. I mean, they're fucking leeches. What do you want me to say? I guess they're okay as a warm-up for all the other horrors you face later in the game, since they mostly appear in the first chapter of the first game. But are they scary? Not really. Do they add to the atmosphere? Not much. Are they visually cool in their design? Well, they're just floppy black worms, so no. Do they add anything to the story? Nah. Do they have any good puzzles associated with them? Barely. The only one that stood out was the one room in the first DLC with a leech and a key in a vase that you had to break. Not that it was anything special, you just had to get the leech as far away from the key as possible and then run back for the key and drag it to the lock before the leech could reach you. But besides that, all you really do with the leeches is run away from them. They're not awful enemies, but like, they're fucking leeches, that's all I have to say. Number 17 is the shoe monster, lurking in the shoe room. In this section you have to jump into the shoe pile and crawl towards a safe spot before the shoe monster reaches you. But really the scariest thing about this monster is that it reminded me of the shoe piles of Auschwitz. Looking at that just makes me uneasy. Whereas this thing is not very noteworthy. It's only there for a brief moment and you never actually see what it is. Which does in a way make it scarier because you don't understand what you're dealing with.
And you always fear what you don't understand.
Yeah, this point's been done to death, but it is true. But I do wish you could at least see a hand or a claw or a dick, but you don't even get that. It doesn't even have a character model. Or a dick. The only indication of it existing is that it pushes shoes out of its way as it's moving towards you, but at least it's somewhat unnerving to go through here because of how slowly you move, while the monster has no issues doing it. And I like the placement of the room, how you stumble on it just after you escape from the janitor and think you're safe, but you're not. Number 16 is the flesh walls. I didn't really consider these to be enemies myself, but the wiki does, so I guess I should. So at the very end of the game, the walls inside this massive tower are revealed to be just eyeballs and flesh. And they don't take kindly to your presence and give you a brief but very unforgiving chase. It's not helped by how unstable the ground is. I found it hard to tell what was safe to jump on and what wasn't, but still, I appreciate the flesh walls for how nasty they look. It looks like living diarrhea. What the fuck did you eat? But one of my favorite visuals was the scene at the end of the game when Mono is left behind in what looks like the belly of a giant beast, with eyes staring down at you from everywhere. And it kind of pays off all those eye symbols all over the first and the second game. I mean, I don't really know much about the story in this game and I'm not fully sure what the eyes mean, but I think it's a good thing that they've gotten people to talk and speculate about it. Or maybe it's just my Bloodborne bias, since Bloodborne is literally just eyeballs.
Eyes.
Number 15 is the living hands. These remind me of the facehuggers from Alien, which instantly makes them better. But more obviously, these are supposed to imitate spiders. So if you have arachnophobia, I bet you're not very fond of this part of the game. The hand spiders are minor enemies, kind of like the leeches. But unlike those little slugs, these things do their job of being creepy pretty well. When you enter the hospital and see countless bodies, you know they're going to wake up. But what I didn't expect was for their hands to detach themselves from the rest of the bodies to start crawling around on the floor and chase me. I don't know why I didn't. This is Little Nightmares after all. But at first all you can do is try to run away from them, which led me to the uncomfortable realization that these fuckers can climb. But eventually you find yourself a hammer, which is when you get to fight back. The combat isn't anything too exciting, you only have a single attack to use, but this is a puzzle game so I'm not too shocked. And it does still feel pretty satisfying to crush them, especially with those juicy sound effects. The hands do complicate things by being quick and prone to jumping back to dodge your attacks. But after a while I found it easy to just walk sideways to avoid their attacks and then smack them while they're recovering. There isn't really too much to the hands. I think they're pretty good, but I can't bring myself to rank them higher than some of the more memorable monsters that are yet to come. Number 14 is the Shadow Kids. I like how they're introduced by at first only being seen in the background stalking you. But eventually they get aggressive, and the only way of defending yourself is by shining a flashlight on them. However, later on when you have to find a way through closed doors, they will keep respawning non-stop. Usually I don't like respawning enemies, but it works for this section. Especially the room in which you have to spin this thing open, where you're going to need to step away from it to deal with the kids before continuing to spin it. And you'll need to be quick or it'll just reset and you'll never escape. It's intense and I like that. The Shadow Kids mainly test your ability to multitask. There's often more than one of them attacking you at once, all while you have to find a way to open a door. I don't have too much to say about them though. They're not really the most memorable enemies you encounter, but I think the flashlight the flashlight mechanic works well enough with them. God damn it. Number 13 is the Hunter. This is the first big boss on this list, and is definitely the worst one in my opinion. He's the first monster you encounter in Little Nightmares 2, which explains why he's one of the easier ones to escape from. Still, considering he's a hunter, I would have expected him to be a little bit more effective at capturing you, but he just isn't very persistent.
I'm kind of retarded.
He very easily forgets about your whereabouts after spotting you, if you just hide for a short moment. But he does bring something unique to the table since he's the only Little Nightmares enemy to wield a gun, which means he can catch you from a long distance and the only way to avoid getting shot is to hide behind something. At first he'll chase you and you need to get behind cover every time he fires, and then continue running while he's reloading, which establishes that he can't shoot twice in a row. He needs to reload, which takes a little bit. Keep this in mind. There's also a stealth section where you have to hide in the grass, and the game developers sadistically placed a crow right in your path, so that if you want to proceed you'll have to scare it off, which of course will alert the hunter. It was probably the scariest part with him, unless we count the part where Six pushed me into the danger zone. It's happened every time, I fucking hate this little bitch! But after a little while there's another chase where you have to climb up inside this building. But this is where I have a big issue with the hunter. Like established before, he needs to reload before shooting again, but here he just ditches that rule completely! What the fuck? That's bullshit! But it's a brief sequence, so it's not the end of the world. I still like the first chapter, and a lot of it is thanks to the hunter. I wish the traps had come into play in the chase scenes though, where you'd have to avoid them while running away from him, or something like that. Oh well, he's still a decent introduction to the game. Number 12 is the viewers. This is how I see my Cuphead audience. Mindless monsters who sustain themselves by consuming Cuphead content and would rather die than do something else. But unlike my viewers, these guys aren't quite as frightening. Part of it is due to how glued they are to their TVs. As long as you don't go near them, they will pay no mind to you. But since you need those TVs yourself to teleport around the place, you won't get to avoid them for long. I really like how they move as if they're glitching, and the way they kill you by just screeching at you is cool. I like them for the world building they add. It's nice to see what the normal citizens in the city are like. They're very nice. Until you turn off their TVs, which is when they'll look for another, or kill you if they see you. If they spot a TV that's turned on, they'll run for it, even if it means falling to their deaths. Which leads to some pretty fun and satisfying puzzles with them. They're also used for some of the eeriest visuals in the game. That's really what I like the most about them. The chase scene with them at the end is pretty short and forgettable, but it's not really what I wanted from them anyway. At number 11 we have the Bullies, who kind of look like Bruno from The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. I rarely got jump scared in either of these two games, but for some reason this one got me. But usually these little shits are more annoying than scary. Unlike the living hands though, the bullies don't try to dodge you, but in turn they're harder to avoid and they're more aggressive. And if you try to hit and miss, you're dead. It was particularly bad in this hallway where you were walking towards the camera. It's just a really awkward angle for this. It also didn't help when this one room was bugged and had invisible walls everywhere, blocking my hits. So the gameplay with these twerps isn't the best, but I do find it pretty satisfying to crack open their heads. They also have traps set all over the school, which you can turn against them, which is fun. I also like the part where you disguise yourself as a bully and see them trash the whole place while fighting each other and singing. It's just a cool scene, even if the only danger is the cauldron one kid is trying to push down. The bullies are overall kind of annoying to deal with, but I think the school chapter would be much worse without them. Plus, it does feel pretty badass when you walk through the school while scraping a sledgehammer across the floor. And not in real life though, don't do that. Number 10 is the adorable doctor, who caringly looks after his patients in his hospital. He's also possibly one of the scariest monsters in either of the two games for me. They really upped the speed of the monsters in this game, I feel. In the first game it was a lot easier to get away from your pursuers, but this guy is relentless. Even if you do get out of sight, he can still peek under tables. So I mostly appreciate his presence in the game for being threatening. But besides that, he's not very special. His encounter is brief and it's mostly just the familiar stuff. You sneak around him, avoid causing noise, distract him, and then finally run away from him. The fact that he clings to the ceiling does alter his field of vision, but it doesn't really change things much. I feel one of the reasons why I found this part so unnerving was because of the area itself. I'll go into more detail as to why the hospital was the scariest place in the game for me in a little bit. But I don't think it was because of him. But having gotten past all of the previous horrors of that chapter, only to then suddenly find yourself looking at a fat fuck clinging to a ceiling, realizing you're not out of the woods yet, definitely cemented this part of the game as unforgettable. At number 9 we have the Granny, this ballsack lurking in the depths. She hunts you all throughout the first DLC by following the example of the shoe monster, except instead of in a pile of shoes, she hunts you in the water, which is immediately scarier. And unlike the shoe monster, you do see glimpses of her. You can see her just chilling in the background. You can see her face above the surface for a brief moment. And at the end she gets a lot more aggressive and reveals her full body. Sexy. I do like the way she's presented, but there is a bit of an issue I have. And it's how fucking goofy she looks. When you look at the concept art, it looks terrifying. But then you look at the actual in-game model and it's just silly looking. It looks like an old man in a dress. But you don't really see her face too well, so I guess it doesn't matter. But I still feel that with a cooler character model, they could have made this 10 times creepier. But when it comes to what she actually does, well, like I implied, she's a lot like the shoe monster. But she's more like an improved shoe monster. She gets progressively more aggressive, she can try to knock you off platforms, and you can toss meat to distract her. All of which are welcome additions that the shoe monster didn't have. And when she continued to try to grab me while I was on this wooden plank, that was actually kinda terrifying. Her sections are generally kind of intense because you never know when she's going to appear next. And you spend a long time in the water in this DLC, so it could be whenever. Then at the end she leaves you no other option than to kill her, by pushing a TV down into the water to electrocute her. It's more of a puzzle than a boss fight, but she does make it more intense by pulling apart wooden platforms that you stand on. Overall, I think her sections are pretty fun, but she does feel a little lazily done in some aspects. Number 8 is the patients. This is why the hospital was as terrifying as it was. Fuck these guys. Fuck the doctor for making them, and most of all, fuck me! These guys are the most annoying and the worst designed enemies in the game. You remember the mechanic of fighting of shadow kids using the flashlight? God damn it! Well, how about if they made that 10 times more annoying and made the flashlight control like your character's hands are made of soggy noodles, so it just flies all over the place? Well, that's what you get here. If you want to get past these things, you need to freeze them in place. But they only stop moving when you expose them to light. And when they've got you surrounded from literally every direction, you can imagine it's a bit tricky to keep them all in place. Especially because, like I said, the controls for moving the flashlight are horrendous. However, it is made easier if you figure out how to focus the flashlight on enemies, which lets you walk backwards while keeping the patients at bay. But you're never told what the controls for doing this are. You're just left to figure it out on your own, and I know lots of people quit at this part because they didn't know about it. I know it's a puzzle game, but I don't think the puzzle should be the controls. But even when you do know how to use the flashlight correctly, I still found it more annoying than anything else. So why are the patients this high up then? Well, simply because they're the scariest enemies out of both of the games for me. And like I said, since this is a horror puzzle game, I will take the horror aspect into consideration, and I think that aspect was done perfectly. I was so tense this entire chapter that I'm surprised my blood was still able to flow in my body. There would often be dozens of these mannequin/zombie patients just standing in the background in the dark, and you could never tell which one was going to wake up and chase you. And there are a few really neat moments with the patients, like the corridor of fuck off and the wheelchair puzzle. Their rigid movement is also great, and I think the way the patients are introduced is really well done, with the light flashing on and off to show you that they can only move in the dark. If the flashlight wasn't so annoying to use, the patients would have gotten a higher placing because I really like the concept of it. But really, it's bad. I did find a workaround it though. You can just turn yourself into a lighthouse and they can't do anything about it, and it's pretty hilarious. Number 7 is the twin chefs. None of my friends seem to find these guys all that frightening. After all, they're just bumbling fatties with silly faces. But I don't know, I actually find them kinda scary. Maybe I'm just scared of fat people. I mean, I used to be fat, so maybe it's like being chased by my past. But maybe the reason people don't find them a threat is because they're fucking stupid. You can just hide under a table, and even if they're right behind you, chasing you, they'll often just forget where you went and give up. I mean, I would tell them don't give up, skeleton, but I mean, you know, their AI is the biggest downside for sure. But even though the doctor basically does everything these two do, but more efficiently, I do find them to be a lot more memorable. I was already tensed while avoiding one chef, but to then find out that there's two of them, I was not thrilled to find that out. Sneaking around their quarters while never knowing if I was about to stumble on them was the main source of concern for me, which did happen when I summoned an elevator, only for it to have one of the chefs inside it. The elevator shenanigans was definitely my favorite part of this chapter. You need a key from the second floor to open a door on the first. You have to use the elevator to get up, which alerts the chef, and he'll call the elevator back down so he can get up to the second floor to chase after you. So you need to hide. Then you need to cause a distraction so you can grab the key, then go back down with the elevator, once again alerting the pork chop. So you again need to hide. I thought that whole part was fun. Also, usually if a monster catches you, they just grab you and the screen fades to black. But if a chef catches you, there's a lot of different ways in which they can kill you. They can stuff you in a fish, in an oven, drop you in a pot, and much more. I find it adds tension and makes you more fearful of being caught than if it just fades to black. One other creepy detail is that they're actually wearing masks, which makes you wonder if they're wearing these hideous masks to hide their real faces. How bad can their real faces be then? So overall, even though their AI is pretty awful, the twin chefs add enough suspense and atmosphere to the chapter to warrant a decently high spot on my list. Number 6 is the guests. What can I say? They're fat, so of course they unnerve me. Well, okay, they're actually not that scary to me. These guys are this high for different reasons than the twin chefs. It's for the visuals and the atmosphere mainly. When you climb along the chain and see that all along you've been on a massive ship of some kind, and see the countless guests climbing aboard in the distance, my jaw nearly dropped. That's gotta be my favorite visual of the first game, maybe even the best out of both. When you get closer, you start hearing their chant, and it sounds satanic. They're calling to me. You then find out where they're all headed, and it's not all that surprising. They're here to feast. They're kind of similar to the viewers, except instead of being fixated on TVs, these guys are fixated on food. And the bad news is that you're food as well.
I don't care if you ate a Satanist.
But what do the guests actually do? Well, it varies. Some will try to crawl at you, some will be too lazy to get out of their seats and just try to grab you with their sausage fingers. They feel more like environmental hazards than actual enemies, but I don't really mind it. The trickiest part was definitely the long table where you have to make some zigzag moves to get past them. But it all culminates in one of my favorite chase sequences in Little Nightmares. You just get this tsunami of obesity crashing down on you. This part kinda reminded me of something from Spirited Away. I guess the look of a Japanese restaurant and the masks and the guests resembling the pigs from that movie did it. So again, nothing too crazy in terms of gameplay, but the guests definitely hosted one of the coolest sections of the game. Number 5 is 6. Well, that sounds dumb. With the Thin Man defeated by this point, I thought the game was about to end. Instead, we got a pretty neat level that was capped off with our friend 6 having turned into a monster. As if she wasn't already. It was definitely a creepy sight when the camera panned to reveal her just chilling next to me with her music box. I like that the call over button finally comes back into play, which you use to distract her so you can grab a hammer and try to destroy the music box. Which she doesn't appreciate, and that's fair enough. It is a nice tune. Then she chases you for a bit until you find an axe, so you can resume destroying the music box. And this is when you get to the final boss. Now, Little Nightmares isn't really the game for boss fights. You have her and 2 or 3 others that I could consider bosses, and none of them are all that great. But I think she's the best one out of them. You have these 2 pink doors which kinda work like portals. You enter one of them and exit out of the other, even if they're not physically connected. In order to get 6 away from the music box, you need to use the call over button again. Then she'll charge at your location, so you should use one of the doors to get to the other side, then quickly get over to her music box while she's distracted. After hitting it, you start tripping until you find an axe again, after which the second phase starts. Same principle here, except you have to utilize more doors than last time. And for the final phase, it gets tricky when you start out with the axe being out of reach. I like that she too can use the portal doors, with her arms anyway. I'm relieved they made this work more like a puzzle than an actual fight, because we know that's not the game's strong suit. I also find it really funny looking when she slaps you into oblivion. So yeah, I enjoyed this. It's visually appealing and a good finale for the game. Number 4 is the lanky armed Janitor. He's definitely the monster with the most screen time and appearances in the series. He appears in a total of 4 chapters, so by the end of the game he had become a very familiar face. I think it went a bit overboard with how many times he reappeared. I would rather have had a new monster in the second DLC. Instead, we get him again. However, he does manage to remain scary in this chapter, especially when he appears in the pitch dark room and freely roams around it. He does always seem to be walking towards your direction though, which is like, fuck off. And there's some cruel placements for little pieces of coal that will cause too much noise if you step on them. The one thing I didn't really like here was that it was sometimes impossible to see myself because of the camera angle, but the Janitor is in general used for some pretty neat puzzles. He's completely blind and can only detect you by sound, which, sure, is a very commonly used gimmick for monsters in horror games. But I like that it makes the Janitor stand out, and they made some clever sound-based puzzles with him. Walking on wooden floor is suicide since it creaks and alerts him, so you always have to try to figure out a safe route using other means, like climbing or walking on linen. You can distract him by turning on a TV or a machine, or by throwing something to lead him away. And when you're forced to do an action that causes lots of noise, it's extra stressful. The one in the library is probably my favorite encounter with him, where you have to climb up and walk across the shelves, and there's some shit in your way, which you can either carefully place elsewhere or throw away, which will confuse the Janitor. I prefer doing that just to fuck with him. I also like his massive spaghetti arms, which make him a far more effective monster than, say, the chefs who are just slow and clumsy. With these arms he can catch you from a really long distance, and they're used for some great scares as well. And they're also used for a boss fight. And it's eh. You have to pull at this grate until it breaks, resulting in the Janitor's arms being cut off by the door. But you'll have to pull at it multiple times before it does. You basically just wait until he moves his arm away from the grate, then run back in. He might not offer a great boss fight, but he does offer some of the best moments of the first game. Number 3 is the Teacher. She's kind of like the Janitor of Little Nightmares 2, except instead of overly long arms, she has a stretchy penis neck. She also has a really disturbing face, this smug smile that never goes away. Like the Janitor, she appears quite a few times, though only in one chapter this time, and has some good puzzles associated with her. Her best puzzle is definitely the one in the piano room. It's kinda eerie seeing a big scary monster like her doing something a normal human would do. She's just playing the piano for her own amusement, and whenever she plays it you can do your shenanigans behind her, like lowering a platform so you and Six can escape. But she always takes a short break from playing the piano every once in a while, which is when it gets completely quiet, and if you make any noise, she'll murder the shit out of you. So it's a nice scenario, and I like the atmosphere of the scene. Another thing I like about her is how, you know how the bullies are just horrible noisy brats? Well, in her classroom they're the complete opposite. Here they seem to be just scared of her and don't dare to make a sound. They're so focused on doing what the teacher tells them that they don't even notice you unless the teacher does. I almost feel bad for them. Until I'm reminded that they're annoying shits. Fuck you, Bruno. Like the Janitor, she also gets to be creepy in a library. Here she utilizes her terrible neck when she looks for you behind these weird book pillars. It was the most clenched that I've been in either of these 2 games, and I can't believe I got away with it. I guess she really is like the Janitor. Fucking blind. But by far the most disturbing part with her is when you try to escape the piano room. Vents have for a long time been a safe zone, but not with her. She forces her dickhead in there, and the lighting especially makes it look terrifying. Even though it's a straightforward chase, it's one of the scariest ones for me. And there's something about the final shot of the snake-like thing looking around in the rain that stuck with me. I don't like it. So the Teacher is a horrible, frightening, and thoroughly memorable monster, and I love and hate her. At number 2 we have the Lady. If you've only played the main game of Little Nightmares 1, you might be confused why she's this high up, but the answer for that is DLC. The final DLC gave her just enough screen time that I'm confident enough to rank her as number 2. She still could have had a little bit more, but regardless, for having so little screen time, she did a great job making a lasting impression. The atmosphere is immediately set when you enter her quarters as Six, where you hear her humming to herself while looking at a broken mirror. All the mirrors in her area are broken, except for one, but we'll get to that soon. Sneaking past her on this wooden floor that has been established to be prone to creaking made me very nervous, but thankfully she won't notice you unless you run or get too close. Then you have to crack open a pot to get the key from it, but you know that will get her attention. But instead of her coming to the room to inspect, it all just goes quiet. And that's even worse. It being completely silent and you anticipating an attack is just pain. Then she does attack and it scared the bitch out of me. The chase is brief and ends with you finding the one intact mirror. As you could guess, you can turn this one against her. You get a pretty mediocre but serviceable boss fight with her. I really don't have much to say about it, so let's move on to what I love the most about her. The mannequins. It's both amazing and evil how many mannequins they placed all over the area. The intention is clear, they want you to be unsure if you're looking at a mannequin or the lady, and it works. I was often startled by what turned out to be just a mannequin wearing similar clothes as her. The lady really shines in the DLC as a scary being. Instead of humming to herself, this time she has a music box. And unlike the humming, I found this tune to be kinda calming, especially because I could always hear where she was and she didn't move around the place. At first anyway. After you've made enough progress, it all goes back to being silent as the grave. And it's again, terrifying. You as the runaway kid also get to see her inner beauty before being chased by her. The way she floats behind the mannequins is just horrible, but in a good way. And adding to her scariness factor, you as the runaway kid don't get to escape from her clutches. And this is when we find out where all the cute little gnomes in this game come from. From her. And it's especially sad knowing what happens to him in the end. She's overall the scariest monster in Little Nightmares 1 for me, and this disturbing revelation just adds to it. Number 1 is the Thin Man, since the name Slender Man was already taken. All the sequences with this guy are really cool, thanks to the visuals and the sound design. He makes a hell of an entrance by appearing through a TV. I love how whenever he appears, he just ear rapes you simply by being near you. I also like just the creepy way he walks and sometimes teleports. It's sad that he doesn't have many appearances in the game. He only chases you once in a pretty standard chase sequence. You just run forward, it's pretty on the rails. Get it? 'Cause you're in a train? Alright, I'll go die. The most intense bits with him were when you had to break a window or a door while he's slowly and methodically walking towards you. What makes it even worse is that while you're in a massive rush, you move in slow motion. It makes it a lot more stressful and, well, that is the intention, so I guess good job. But he does have a boss fight at the end of the chapter where you have to high-five him to death. While gameplay-wise it's obviously nothing amazing, I like that it mirrors how you attune the TVs multiple times before in the game. The music and the visuals are also top-notch here. I especially love how the buildings contort over the course of the struggle. But mostly I love the Thin Man for the story actually. When you first encounter him, you see him as just another evil monster. But at the very end of the game, Mono is left behind by Six to rot inside the tower. I don't know why she did it. It's not like I ever wronged her or anything. Then we see a time-lapse of Mono sitting alone, trapped in the tower, where he eventually turns into the Thin Man. The very same one that you as Mono killed before. He's actually stuck in an endless loop, trying to prevent the cruel fate from happening, only to die by his younger self's hand. That's the very simple version of his story, and since this game is an obscure mindfuck, I can't really know much more with certainty. So the Thin Man is a very tragic character, and I wasn't expecting to feel sad for a scary monster like him. So he makes up for his minimal screen time in the game by having the longest lasting impact, and that's why he's the best monster in Little Nightmares for me. One last thing though, the foreshadowing about the Thin Man and Mono being the same on the front cover of the game, that's fucking clever. And there we go, that's every monster in Little Nightmares ranked. This video was a pain in the ass to make because of how difficult it was to rank them. It's not like Souls where it's very clear to me what makes a good boss. Here there's so many different things I took into account, and I kept changing the order of the monsters every day pretty much. But regardless, I do greatly enjoy most of them. Even the monsters at the bottom I didn't really hate. There's nothing particularly wrong with the leeches or the shoe monster, and the rest only get better from there. I did talk a lot about how scary some monsters were, and even though they are, I would not at all say that these two games are very scary horror games. They're more creepy than anything else. I don't think anything will top how terrified I was when playing Alien Isolation. I mainly love Little Nightmares for the art style, the creative creature design and the atmosphere, and I did enjoy playing the games quite a bit. I haven't played very Little Nightmares since it's a phone game and they're not really my thing. Don't get me wrong though, even though this video was a pain to do, I also feel refreshed coming back to YouTube. But thank you all for watching, see ya.